Charging decisions, where cases are won or lost. It's April 24th. Welcome to YesToHellWith.com. In the previous video, we examined the incentive structure that surrounds prosecutors. Today, we move into one of the most critical and least understood points in the entire process. That is charging decisions. Because this is where cases are not just initiated, they are shaped. And often they are decided long before anyone ever steps into the courtroom. Now understand this clearly. A prosecutor has enormous discretion at this stage. They decide whether to bring charges, what charges to bring, how many charges to bring, and that discretion is rarely challenged. Now on its face, that may seem reasonable. But when you combine that discretion with the incentive structure we discussed, something begins to emerge, a pattern, because the decision is no longer simply, is there sufficient evidence? It often becomes, what can be charged? What will stick? What creates leverage? And that is where the shift occurs. Because once charging becomes strategic, it no longer is purely about justice. It's about positioning. Now let's talk about what this looks like in practice. A single act can be broken into multiple charges, each carrying separate penalties, each increasing exposure, each increasing pressure. This is commonly referred to as charge stacking, and its purpose is not always to go to trial. Its purpose is leverage, because once multiple charges are in place, the risk to the defendant increases dramatically. And with that risk comes pressure to comply, to settle, to plead, not necessarily because the charges are valid, but because the consequences of fighting become too great. Now bring this into the Liberty Dialogue's framework. This is where clarity cuts through the confusion, because at this stage we are dealing with standing and obligation. The key question is not what has been charged. The key question is what has been proven, and more importantly, what must be proven to establish obligation. Because charging is not proof, allegation is not obligation, and volume of charges does not create legitimacy. But in practice, that distinction is blurred. Now here is the critical insight. Most people respond to charges emotionally. They react to the weight, the number, the language. But within the Liberty Dialogues, we do not respond emotionally, we respond structurally. We ask, what is the authority behind each charge? What jurisdiction is being asserted? What status is being applied? What standing is claimed? And where is the specific obligation clearly defined and lawfully established? Because without those elements, a charge is nothing more than an assertion. And assertions, no matter how many, do not equal proof. Now here is where most cases are lost, not in trial, but in perception. Because once a person accepts the premise that multiple charges equal guilt, they have already conceded ground. They begin negotiating instead of questioning, responding instead of examining, complying instead of challenging. And that is exactly what the system relies upon. Now let's understand this. The power of the prosecutor at the charging stage is not just in the law, it is in the presumption that follows the charge. And if that presumption is not challenged, then the rest of the process simply unfolds from that point. So the objective is not to argue the charges. It is to examine the foundation of the charges, to test them, to question them, to require that each element be proven, not assumed. Because once that happens, the leverage shifts, the pressure changes, and the structure begins to reassert itself. And that is why the Liberty Dialogues is even more powerful than I can even imagine. Get the Liberty Dialogues and begin to understand this content. And as always, may truth reign supreme.